A dog's sixth sense. My name is Anders, and I live alone with my Jack Russell Terrier Milo. Yes, I named him after the dog in the movie The Mask. We have a small house situated a few kilometers outside the village. It's a quiet place, surrounded by dense forest, far from the hustle and bustle of town. The isolation seemed perfect, offering peace and a sense of freedom. But as I discovered, isolation also meant vulnerability. Milo and I had a routine. Every morning, we'd take a walk through the woods, and in the evenings, we'd sit by the fireplace while I read or worked on my laptop. Milo would curl up by my feet, content and relaxed. But one evening, I noticed a change in him. He started acting strangely, barking at empty corners and growling at the darkness outside the windows. At first, I thought it was just his natural instinct kicking in, perhaps sensing a wild animal nearby. But it became clear that something else was at play when Milo began refusing to enter certain rooms. His ears would perk up, and he'd whimper, tail tucked between his legs, as if something unseen was scaring him. A few nights later, I was jolted awake by a loud thud. My heart raced as I grabbed a flashlight and crept through the house, Milo by my side, growling low in his throat. The source of the noise seemed to come from the kitchen, but when I got there, everything was in its place. As I stood in the dark, trying to calm myself, I heard it again, a faint scratching sound, like nails on a chalkboard coming from the walls. Milo barked furiously, like the little hero he is. The sound was subtle, yet persistent, like something or someone was trying to claw its way into the house. I checked every corner but found nothing out of the ordinary. Over the next few days, the noises grew more frequent. I'd hear doors creaking open and slamming shut on their own. Once, I returned from the village to find every cupboard door in the kitchen wide open. Milo became more agitated, often barking at the ceiling or the walls, his hackles raised. One night, I was sitting in the living room when Milo suddenly jumped up and ran to the front door, barking wildly. I followed, confused and a little scared. To my shock, the front door was wide open. I knew I had locked it before sitting down. I called out into the night, but received no response. Milo bolted out the door, disappearing into the darkness. Panicked, I grabbed a flashlight and followed him, calling his name. The forest was eerily quiet, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the thick darkness. After what felt like an eternity, I found Milo near the edge of the forest, whimpering and shivering. I scooped him up and hurried back to the house, locking the door securely behind us. This became a nightly occurrence. Every night the front door would somehow open on its own, and Milo would run out, as if being chased by something unseen. Each time I have to venture out and search for him, my fear intensifies. I'm constantly afraid that one day I won't find him again. It soon became clear that whatever was haunting us had a special focus on Milo. He began to lose weight. His once bright eyes became dull and tired. He whined and refused to eat or drink. The sight of my beloved dog suffering broke my heart and filled me with a sense of helplessness and fear. I took him to the vet, but they couldn't find anything wrong with him. They asked me to come back if it didn't get better in a few days. A couple of nights later, as I lay in bed, I heard a strange guttural sound coming from the living room. A deep, rumbling growl that sent shivers down my spine. I grabbed my flashlight and rushed to the living room, only to find Milo cowering in a corner, shaking uncontrollably. The room was cold, much colder than the rest of the house, As I stood there trying to calm Milo, I felt an oppressive presence, like something was watching me, feeding off my fear. The air felt thick with a sense of malevolence, and I knew that whatever was haunting us was growing stronger. Desperate for answers, I started researching the history of the house and the surrounding area. I discovered that the house had a dark past. I found stories of other residents who had experienced similar paranormal activity. Some had seen shadowy figures in the woods, while others reported hearing strange noises at night. But none of the accounts matched the intensity of what Milo and I were experiencing. I reached out to a local historian, hoping to find some answers. He recounted the story of a family that lived in the house many years ago. The father was notorious for his violent temper and erratic behavior. He was abusive toward his wife and young son. One night, the wife and son finally left him. Unable to cope, he began drinking heavily, and his aggression only worsened. But one day, the man vanished without a trace, leaving the house with nothing. It was as if he had disappeared into thin air. None of the villagers ever saw him again, and some believed his spirit still lingered, seeking either revenge or closure. As the days turned into weeks, the haunting grew more intense. The strange noises became more frequent and louder. I'd hear footsteps echoing through the empty halls, and the doors would slam shut with a force that shook the entire house. Milo's condition continued to deteriorate. He'd spend hours staring at the same spot on the wall, growling and barking at nothing. His once playful demeanor was replaced by a constant state of fear and anxiety. I could see the toll it was taking on him, and it tore me apart. One night, I woke up to the sound of Milo howling in pain. I rushed to his side, only to find him lying on the floor, convulsing. His eyes were wide with terror, and his body was covered in scratches and bruises. It was as if something invisible was attacking him, feeding off his fear and suffering. I knew I had to do something to protect Milo. I took him to the vet and cleaned his wounds. The day after, I reached out to a local priest, hoping he could help. He agreed to come to the house and perform a blessing, but warned me that it might not be enough to banish the entity. The priest arrived the next day, carrying a small vial of holy water and a Bible. He walked through the house, reciting prayers and sprinkling holy water on the walls and floors. As he did, the atmosphere seemed to lighten, and the oppressive presence that had haunted us began to fade. Milo seemed to sense the change, and for the first time in weeks, he relaxed. I felt a glimmer of hope, believing that the worst was behind us. But the priest warned me that the entity might not be gone for good. He advised me to stay vigilant and continue the prayers. For a few days, things seemed to improve. Milo regained some of his strength, and the strange noises stopped. I began to believe that we had finally rid ourselves of the haunting. But my relief was short-lived. A few nights later, I woke up to the sound of Milo barking frantically. I rushed to the living room, only to find the front door wide open and Milo nowhere in sight. Panic set in as I grabbed my flashlight and ran into the forest, calling his name. The forest was silent, the darkness pressing in on me from all sides. I could feel the entity's presence, stronger than ever. As I searched for Milo, I heard a low, guttural growl, followed by the sound of footsteps behind me. I turned, shining my flashlight into the darkness, but saw nothing. I continued searching, my fear growing with each passing moment. Finally, I found Milo near the edge of the forest, lying on the ground, motionless. I scooped him up and rushed back to the house, my heart heavy with dread. Back at the house, I laid Milo on the couch and checked him for injuries. He was breathing, but barely. His eyes were glazed over, and he was unresponsive. I knew that whatever was haunting us was trying to take him away from me. Desperate to save Milo, I grabbed the vial of holy water and began reciting the prayers the priest had taught me. The air grew colder, and I could feel the entity's presence closing in on us. I continued the prayers, my voice trembling with fear and determination. As I sprinkled the holy water on Milo, I felt a surge of energy, like a wave of darkness crashing over me. The room grew colder, and the lights flickered. I could hear the entity's guttural growl, louder and more menacing than ever, but I didn't stop. I continued the prayers, my voice growing stronger with each word. The air seemed to crackle with energy, and the oppressive presence that had haunted us began to wane. I could see Milo stirring, his eyes slowly regaining their focus. After what felt like hours, the room grew still, and the oppressive feeling disappeared. Milo looked up at me, his eyes filled with relief and gratitude, tail wagging. I laid down next to him, exhausted, but relieved that he had survived. In the days that followed, the strange noises stopped, and the house felt lighter. Milo slowly regained his strength, and the fear that had plagued him seemed to dissipate. I continued the prayers and blessings, determined to keep the entity at bay. I never found out what had haunted us, or why it had targeted Milo, but I think it was the hateful soul from the abusive man who had lived in the house. As I sit by the fireplace, Milo curled up at my feet. I can't help but feel a sense of gratitude. Milo had survived the haunting. The house, once a place of fear and darkness, had become a sanctuary of peace and light. The dog knows first. My name is Marie, and I live in a cozy townhouse with my German shepherd, Tyra. Our neighborhood is a peaceful suburban area filled with families and friendly neighbors. It's the kind of place where everyone knows each other and nothing out of the ordinary ever happens. At least, that's what I thought. It all started one evening after I returned from work. Tyra usually greeted me at the door, her tail wagging with excitement. But that day, she was acting strangely. Instead of her usual exuberance, she stood stiffly by the door, her ears perked and eyes fixated on something invisible. I called her name, but she didn't respond. Her gaze was locked on a corner of the living room. "What's wrong, girl?" I asked, trying to sound soothing. She finally broke her stare and looked at me, her eyes filled with unease. I shrugged it off, thinking she might have heard a noise outside. But over the next few days, her behavior grew more peculiar. Tyra started barking at nothing, growling low and menacingly at empty spaces. She would stand in the middle of the room, her hackles raised, staring at the same corner. It was unsettling, but I tried to rationalize it. Dogs had better senses than humans, after all. Maybe she was picking up on something I couldn't. After a long day's work, as I was watching TV, Tyra began to growl again. This time, she was facing the kitchen. I muted the television and listened, but there was nothing. The house was silent. I got up to check, my heart pounding in my chest. I walked into the kitchen and flicked on the light. Everything seemed normal. I sighed, feeling a bit foolish for letting Tyra's behavior get to me. "There's nothing there, Tyra," I said, but she continued to growl, her eyes following something that wasn't visible to me. A few nights later, I was jolted awake by Tyra barking ferociously. I glanced at the clock. 3:15 a.m. Groggy and annoyed, I got out of bed to calm her down. She was in the hallway, staring at the stairs that led to the first floor. Her barking was frantic, as if she was trying to warn me about something. I walked over to her and placed a hand on her back. "It's okay, girl. There's nothing there," I whispered. But as soon as I spoke, I felt a cold breeze brush past me, sending a shiver down my spine. I turned around, expecting to see an open window, but everything was shut tight. Tyra's barking ceased, replaced by a low whine. She looked up at me with wide, fearful eyes, and for the first time, I felt a genuine sense of dread. The next day at work, I couldn't concentrate. My mind kept drifting back to the strange occurrences at home. That evening, as I was preparing dinner, I heard a faint humming sound. It was so soft that I thought I was imagining it at first. I turned off the stove and listened. The humming grew louder, filling the kitchen with an eerie melody. I followed the sound to the living room, where Tyra was sitting rigidly, her ears twitching. The humming stopped abruptly, and the house fell silent again. I stood there, feeling a cold sweat forming on my forehead. Tyra let out a low whimper, and I knelt down to comfort her. "It's okay, girl. It's just the house settling or something," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. Over the next few days, the paranormal activity escalated. Doors would open and close on their own, lights would flicker, and I started to hear faint whispers when I was alone. Tyra's behavior grew more erratic, and she refused to go into certain rooms. One night, as I was brushing my teeth, I saw a shadowy figure in the mirror. I spun around, but there was no one there. My heart raced, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I decided to call my friend Lisa, who was a bit of a skeptic but always willing to lend an ear. "Marie, you're just stressed out. Maybe it's time for a vacation," she suggested. "I wish it were that simple, Lisa. Tyra's been acting strange too." "It's not just me," I replied. "Okay, why don't you stay at my place for a few days, see if things settle down," she offered. Grateful for the suggestion, I packed a bag for Tyra and me and headed to Lisa's house. The change of scenery was refreshing, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of normalcy. Tyra seemed more relaxed too, and I began to hope that whatever had been haunting us would be left behind. After a few days, I returned home, feeling more confident and less afraid. But at the first night back, Tyra started barking again, her eyes fixated on the same corner of the living room. I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach. Determined to get to the bottom of this, I contacted a local paranormal investigator named Rick. He agreed to come over and conduct an investigation. When he arrived, he set up his equipment and began asking questions, trying to communicate with whatever was in the house. As he worked, the air in the room grew colder, and I could see my breath forming small clouds. Tyra whined and pressed against my leg. Suddenly, one of Rick's devices beeped loudly, and he looked up, his face serious. "There's definitely something here, Marie. I'm picking up a strong presence," he said. I felt a mix of fear and relief. At least now I had confirmation that I wasn't losing my mind. "Can you tell what it wants?" I asked. Rick shook his head. "It's hard to say. Spirits often linger because of unfinished business or strong emotions. This one seems particularly agitated." That night, Rick set up cameras and audio recorders around the house. He stayed with me, and we both tried to get some sleep. Around 2 a.m., I was awoken by a loud bang. Tyra was barking furiously, and Rick rushed into the room. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his eyes wide. "Yeah," I answered with a shaky voice. We checked the cameras and saw that one of the doors had slammed shut on its own. The audio recorder picked up faint whispers, too distorted to understand. The next morning, Rick suggested a cleansing ritual to try and rid the house of the spirit. We performed the ritual, filling the rooms with the scent of sage and reciting prayers for peace and protection. Tyra seemed to calm down, and for a while, the house felt lighter. But it wasn't long before the activity resumed. I realized that the spirit was not going to leave easily. It seemed to be tied to the house, or perhaps even to me. I contacted Rick again. He suggested performing a more powerful ritual, one that would require the help of a medium. Reluctantly, I agreed. We arranged for the medium, a woman named Katie, to visit the house the following week. Katie arrived and immediately sensed the presence in the house. She walked through each room, her eyes closed, muttering softly to herself. When she reached the living room, she stopped and opened her eyes. "The spirit here is very strong. It's something evil, filled with anger and hate," Katie said. "Can we get rid of it?" I asked, feeling a glimmer of hope. "We can try," Katie replied, "but it will take time and patience." We spent the next few hours performing a series of rituals designed to cleanse the house and help the spirit find peace. Tyra watched us, her eyes calm for the first time in weeks. When we finished, Katie told me that it might take a few days for the full effect to be felt. In the following days, the activity gradually decreased. The house felt warmer and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. Tyra stopped barking at nothing and began to relax. I started to feel like I could finally breathe again. A week later, I invited Lisa over to thank her for her support. As we sat in the living room chatting and laughing, I felt a sense of normalcy returning. Tyra lay at my feet, her tail wagging contentedly. "Looks like things are back to normal," Lisa said, smiling. I nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. "Yeah, I think we finally got rid of whatever was haunting us." But just as I said that, Tyra lifted her head and stared at the corner of the room. A chill ran down my spine, and I felt a cold breeze brush past me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. "Did you feel that?" I saw Lisa's smile falter as she turned her head toward the corner of the room. My heart sank. Tyra's hackles rose, and she let out a low growl. "Maybe it's just a draft," Lisa suggested, her voice lacking confidence. "Trying to convince myself of the same," I replied. "Yeah, probably just a draft." But deep down, I knew it was more than that. The oppressive feeling I'd come to dread was creeping back, filling the room with an icy chill. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "Let's go to the kitchen and make some tea," I suggested, hoping to distract both of us. As we walked into the kitchen, Tyra followed closely, her eyes still darting back to the living room. I busied myself with the teapot, trying to ignore the nagging fear gnawing at my insides. Lisa sat at the table, her fingers tapping nervously on the surface. "Marie," she began, "are you sure everything is okay now? I mean, after all those rituals and everything?" I forced a smile. "I'm sure it was just a draft, Lisa. Let's not jump to conclusions." Just as I spoke, a loud bang echoed from the living room. Tyra barked furiously, and both Lisa and I jumped to our feet. We rushed back into the living room to find the door to the storage closet wide open, its contents strewn across the floor. "Okay, That definitely wasn't a draft, Lisa said, her voice trembling. We need to call Katie and Rick again. This isn't over, I replied. I grabbed my phone and dialed Katie's number. She answered on the second ring, and I quickly explained what had happened. I'll be there as soon as I can, she said. In the meantime, keep Tyra close and try to stay calm. Rick arrived first, his equipment in tow. He wasted no time setting up his cameras and audio recorders, determined to capture any paranormal activity. Katie arrived shortly after, her expression grim. The spirit is still here, she said, her voice heavy with concern, and it's angry. Katie walked through the house, her eyes closed, feeling the energy in each room. She stopped in the living room, where Tyra was still growling at the corner. Katie opened her eyes and sighed. The spirit is attached to you, Marie, she said softly. It's feeding off your fear and anxiety. We need to find a way to break this connection. I felt a lump form in my throat. How do we do that? We'll need to perform a more powerful cleansing ritual, Katie explained. One that will require your full participation and strength. We spent the next few hours preparing for the ritual. Katie instructed me to gather personal items that held positive memories and energy, things that would help me focus on love and peace rather than fear. I collected photos of happy moments, a cherished childhood toy, and a few other items that brought me comfort. Katie set up a circle of candles in the living room and placed the items at the center. She asked me to sit in the circle with Tyra by my side. Rick stood nearby, ready to document the process. We're going to channel positive energy into this space, Katie explained. You need to focus on your love for Tyra and the happy memories you have. Let that energy fill you and push out the negative. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, trying to block out the fear and focus on the love I felt for Tyra. I pictured her as a playful puppy, the joy she brought me, and the comfort of her presence. As I concentrated, I felt a warmth spread through my chest, pushing back the cold fear that had settled there. Katie began to chant softly, her words a soothing melody. The candles flickered, and I felt a gentle breeze swirl around us. Tyra pressed closer to me, her growling subsiding as she relaxed. Suddenly, a loud crash broke my concentration. I opened my eyes to see one of the candles had fallen over, the flame flickering dangerously close to the items in the circle. Katie quickly grabbed it and set it upright, her chanting never faltering. Stay focused, Marie, she urged. We're almost there. I closed my eyes again and redoubled my efforts, letting the warmth of my positive memories fill me once more. The breeze grew stronger, swirling around us like a protective barrier. I felt a sense of peace wash over me, and Tyra let out a contented sigh. After what felt like an eternity, Katie's chanting ceased and the breeze died down. I opened my eyes to see the candles burning steadily, their light casting a warm glow around the room. Katie smiled at me, her eyes filled with relief. It's done, she said. The spirit has been cleansed from this house. Rick checked his equipment, confirming that there were no more signs of paranormal activity. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, and I let out a deep breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Thank you, Katie, I said, my voice trembling with gratitude. I don't know how to repay you. Katie shook her head. Just live your life in peace, Marie. That's all the repayment I need. As Katie and Rick packed up their equipment, Lisa gave me a hug. I'm so glad this is finally over, she said. You deserve to feel safe in your own home. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in weeks, with Tyra curled up beside me. The house felt different now, filled with a sense of tranquility and warmth. The oppressive atmosphere was gone, replaced by a newfound peace. In the days that followed, Tyra's behavior returned to normal. She no longer barked at empty corners or growled at invisible threats. I felt a renewed sense of security in my home, confident that the spirit had been banished for good. Life slowly returned to its regular rhythm, and the memories of the haunting began to fade. I focused on the positive, cherishing the moments of joy and love that filled my days. Tyra remained my faithful companion, her presence a constant reminder that she's my best friend. Well, that's another one for the books. Please like and subscribe. You are awesome. Nighty night.